Production funding for Ruckus has been provided by gifts from Dave and Jamie Cummings, the Hartwig family, Hush Blackwell, Barbara and Peter Gattermeyer, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Ruckus, our weekly food for thought fight over the news of the day and the trends of the times. I'm Mike Shannon. The Ruckettes join me shortly in our topics this week. Edgemoor gets the edge to build KCI, a monumental controversy building over monuments, and minimum wage, maximum disagreement. Plus, of course, roast and toast. But we start with our Newsmaker segment and talk about one of the most persistent topics of debate in the metro area, the future of KCI. The last few days have been chaotic in the KCI saga, with battles over alleged conflicts of interest against a council member and a member of the city's legal team. The city's selection committee reached a final decision on Wednesday and picked Edgemoor Infrastructure and Real Estate of Bethesda, Maryland. The council must now ratify the choice, and then voters will decide whether to build a new airport on November the 7th. To talk with us about all of this is Kevin Koster, who created the website Save KCI. Mr. Koster, welcome to Ruckus. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So before we talk about what happened the last few days, let's talk about what's happened over the past several years and some history. Why did you start this website back in, I believe, 2013?
Well, about 4 years ago, I happened to be reading a story in the Star talking about the aviation department wanting to push forward with the idea of a new single terminal, and they needed to hire a PR firm and pay them about $17,000 to spin it. My first thought was, it was such a great idea, why do we need to pay $100,000 to spin it? And the more I looked into the proposal, the more things in it didn't make sense as a user of the airport, such as horrible customer experience and inconvenient and an environmental disaster waiting to happen, things like that. And I noticed that nobody was asking the questions. I read the article and I had more questions after reading it than I had before I read it, so I just decided to ask them myself.
And you got a lot of response from people who found the website, and I'm curious about that. What kind of responses did you get? Mostly that agreed with you that there were problems that aren't being addressed, or did you get notes from people saying we got to have a one terminal brand new airport? Well,
I think initially there was a lot of thank you for doing this, unexpected. There was apparently I'd opened some pent up. A lot of people have apparently been asking these questions and had a forum to ask them. So we sort of just threw it open to be, this will be the place to bring the questions that you don't think are being asked elsewhere. So I think at first there was mostly people that wondered why we needed to go down this road. And then over time, started getting some people on both sides, and it became a nice debate. I set ground rules, no name calling and things like that. And there have been some good discussions, I think.
And the mayor appointed you to his committee to study possibilities for a new airport.
Right.
Was that a good experience?
It was for me. I mean, I learned a lot about airports. I think in general it was somewhat frustrating because it became clear as we went through the process that it was sort of, the committee itself was, I don't want to necessarily say predestined. Some would say it was predestined, but there was a definitive commitment toward finding a certain outcome, I think.
Well, given your interest in this and your experience, do you have an opinion? Do you think Kansas City needs a new one-terminal airport, or do you think the present three-terminal structure should just be renovated?
I think the market's evolving a lot. I think 4 years ago, there's no question we didn't need it. I think there's some things have changed with aviation and the airline capacities and things like that. There might be, there's a better argument now for a single terminal, certainly, than there was 4 years ago. But we'll have to wait and see what Edgemoor comes up with.
Are you going to continue the website?
Yes.
Are you planning to take a position once you decide whether this is worthwhile or not?
Probably. Again, we need to wait and see what Edgemoor comes back with and get some more commitments from the airlines. One of the things that was stated was that the airlines were going to pay for the single terminal, which is a bending of the truth somewhat. They're going to continue to pay rent, and they'll make up some of the difference. We don't sell enough hot dogs with the new concession stands. They'll make up part of that, but the largest single piece of revenue at the airport's from parking.
Your background, I think, is in marketing. How would you say the marketing of the rollout of the new one-terminal airport plan is going to affect the way voters perceive this election?
Oh, I think it's going to be a huge piece. But I also...
Good or bad?
Well, I think it needs to be honest. I think there's been enough discussion of this over the last 4 years that it just needs to be open and honest. And, you know, if I were advising the opposition, I would say look for every area where they, you know, are less than truthful and exploit that. And if I was working for the other side, I'd say be open and honest and not let anybody come back with a question, calling into question the integrity of the process.
And people want to get to your website. What's the address?
SaveKCI.org.
SaveKCI.org. Mr. Koster, thank you very much. Appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
That is Kevin Koster of the Save KCI website. Now let's meet the panel and start a ruckus. John Stevens heads Rock Hill Strategic. Annie Presley is an author, publisher, and GOP fundraiser. Mary O'Halloran is a media and communications consultant, and Woody Kozad is president of the Kozad Company, a government relations firm. And so, Ruckus is back after its summer vacation. We missed you and hope you missed us. There is much to catch up on, so let's start with more about KCI. City Council Selection Committee has chosen Edgemoor Infrastructure and Real Estate of Maryland to build a new one-terminal KCI, beating out 3 other firms, including Burns & McDonnell, the local company that initially presented the concept of a privately financed airport to city officials. The selection of Edgemoor now goes to the full City Council for ratification and presumably to voters in November. The last several days have been fraught with controversy, including allegations of conflict of interest directed at a council member and one of the city's outside legal counsels. Now, assuming plans move forward for a November vote, how does all of this unexpected and probably unnecessary controversy affect the prospects of voters approving a new airport? And let's start with John.
Well, you know, the process on the surface and to the public was certainly a mess. But ultimately, I think the message needs to transition now to, I think the committee evaluated these proposals, selected one that they believe is the best. If the process moves forward, they can move into education. And hopefully, I think it bodes well. I think ultimately the merits of needing a new airport should be the lead discussion for November.
Do you think it's fair to say, Annie, that momentum was building before the selection? Momentum was building to build a new airport?
I think momentum was building, and this high drama has brought much more attention to the process itself. So,
but does that add to or detract from the momentum to pass the measure?
Well, every time you get mentioned on TV or radio, it's a good thing. Whether it's negative or positive, we've learned that in politics over the years. So I think it's a good thing. And Troy Schulte has come out strongly.
City manager.
Yes, saying this was a decision that we made. We had confidence. We had courage about these guys. And I think it's going to continue to be building toward a single terminal.
If you're running Burns & McDonnell, Mary, you must be sort of depressed today, don't you think?
I'm sorry, what did you say? If I were running Burns & McDonnell, what?
I said you would probably be rather depressed today.
Oh, I would think so. You know, their team approach looked great. You had George Brett on TV, and certainly we want to know what George knows about airlines and the need to.
He knows a first-class lineup when he sees it.
He knows a first-class lineup. I have to say, Mike, that I've been watching the process very, very closely. I was a little upset with Mr. Schulte that he couldn't come up with anything better than it feels real good. The reason we picked Edgewater is it just felt so good. Come on now.
Well, Mary, I mean,
just let me finish.
It's Edgemoor, and there is a local connection to it, is it not?
There is indeed, and of course, the Clarkson Construction Company has been the leader in transportation construction in our metro for how many decades, Woody? And so the process is extremely important. Way back, starting with Mark Van Lowe telling us we're going to have a one terminal whether we like it or not, to this position. And I'll have to say that Catherine Shields and the Kansas City Star really made a contribution to opening this process up from Burns & McDonnell and the mayor to the whole council and outside.
And speaking of the Star, let's put up a graphic of some key points from a recent editorial in the Kansas City Star. They said this whole event should offer 4 lessons. Number 1, the city manager, not the mayor, should run City Hall. Number 2, big ticket project selection should be more open. Number 3, consider conflicts of interest earlier. And then 4th, I want to ask you about this, Woody, says the region needs an airport authority. Is that something with which you could agree?
I think you've
talked about that idea before.
I think that makes sense. Look, the whole region and bigger area than we tend to think of. I'm not just talking about what we call Metro Kansas City, uses this airport. And the idea that the voters in one city, 460,000, 80,000 people, are going to determine this thing. I mean, we're not as ugly as St. Louis, where the airport is actually outside the city that owns it. But it doesn't make sense. The people it serves ought to be the ones who own it and run it. And so I think that's a good idea they have. I do say this, though, that when they say the city manager should run City Hall, look, I've been very critical of the mayor, but he has tried to run City Hall. And when the city manager does it, what actually happens is nobody's running City Hall. So I give Sly some credit for trying to run it.
But the way Kansas City, Missouri government is structured and the way it is supposed to run is with a city manager running it. It's a manager council form of government, not a strong mayor.
Well, but not, the statement is too strong. I agree with you. The reason this city has always worked as well as it has on big ticket items is names like Berkeley, Barnes, Cleaver, and Road
Charles Wheeler.
Charles Wheeler, first of all, and first and foremost. So the mayor is very important in all of this stuff.
We got to move on. What statues should remain standing? Which should be torn down? Who decides? The government or angry protesters? That's the essence of a monumental controversy most recently unleashed following the events in Charlottesville, Virginia. Kansas City is not immune. There's been recent debate over renaming the J.C. Nichols Fountain on the plaza. The United Daughters of the Confederacy Monument on Ward Parkway was defaced by vandals a few weeks ago, later removed at the group's request. The controversies generally deal with issues of race, many stemming from the Civil War that ended more than a century ago. President Trump has been harshly criticized for his remarks following Charlottesville, including the question he asked about demands to remove some historic statues. His question was, where does it end? So let's begin there. Where does it end? And let's start with Mary.
Well, I think it could end with our generation. I really do. I am not as pessimistic about what happened in Charlottesville as some. I really think that what President Trump has done with his outrageous behavior with regard to this whole racial incident in Charlottesville and the death, of course, but it is to ignite the forces of pushback in this country. I think the United States of America, and certainly our community, is ready to end the Confederacy and to remove the statues that are offensive, to put those that are significant historically in some kind of educational situation. And I think the country is moving ahead and ready to say you had your time, you had your war, your Jim Crow, and your propaganda machine talking about from the far right about the Civil War not being about race, but about sovereignty. No, it was about race, and we're ready to move on.
How far does it go? Do we eliminate tributes to FDR, who interned the Japanese Americans who were citizens during World War II?
No, I think you need to look at the Confederacy. That's where this discussion started. That's where it came about, as Mary said. And I think there's
George Washington wasn't part of the Confederacy, and people are talking about changing statues with his
I think people take these discussions to the extreme on both sides. But the reality is, when you're dealing with the Confederacy and you're dealing with memorials, there is a difference between retaining education and memorializing and honoring a Confederacy. And we need to consider that. And we also need to layer in that many of these memorials were added in the Jim Crow era.
Exactly.
They were added in from the in the 1950s. There is a very different context with which many of these memorials were placed.
So Jefferson can remain a statue?
He better.
Let's not rewrite history.
They want to take him off the
though.
Mizzou campus. Look, let's talk about the Confederacy, indeed. Every census, 1990, 2000, 2010, shows us that for 30 years continuously, there's been a trend here in the Midwest. More black people, more African Americans are moving out of the Midwest than are moving in. Every year for 30 years. But we're not alone. That's true of California, the Pacific Northwest, New England. Every place in America is losing net migration of black people to one place, and that place is the South. Black people are voting with their feet to leave every other part of this country and move to where the statues of Lee and Stonewall Jackson are located. My, isn't that odd? But that's their vote. That's what they're doing. Now, I don't say they don't find the statues offensive. I'm sure they do. I'm sure they wince every time they see one of them. But apparently there are things in their lives more important than those statues. Can you imagine that?
Well, Woody,
if
I
the
find the
schools in
statues
Kansas
offensive.
City are segregated and terrible for black people, you might want to leave Kansas City and go to the South, where the only section of the country where a majority of white public school students attend integrated
So,
schools.
Annie, let me ask you this.
That's the Confederacy today.
Does removing one of these statues eliminate the pain it allegedly causes?
I'm not sure we're able to prove that. There are varying opinions on it. But my biggest concern is that we are in the process of rewriting history. And this was real. This happened. It was a big war. More soldiers died in the Civil War than all the other previous wars up to Vietnam. So how is it that we think we're going to soothe this national guilt that we're all suffering by taking down some statues?
Well,
I'm not sure that's
it
the
doesn't-
And
answer.
John, I think a lot of people object to the fact that there are mobs that go in and just tear down statues without any approval from the local government.
Oh, there's not much of that going
Well,
on.
there-
Mike, really.
It has happened.
Any of it is more
I
than
will go
enough.
back to, I don't see anyone complaining, anyone saying we need to remove the markers about the Battle of Westport, because that is educational. That is discussing the history. There are museums to discuss history. There are places to discuss history and contextualize what occurred when there was a civil war.
Well, I'm
but
gonna
the reality
agree
is we don't put up monuments.
Well,
Just
back to my
about-
original question. Where does it stop and who decides?
I think here's where it stops. It stops when the American people, and I think we're very close to being there, say it is time to stop the Confederacy's propaganda machine about what the causes of the Civil War were. It's over. We are now a united nation. We don't honor Robert E. Lee in a place where people of all political persuasions and black people alike, and for granddaughters and grandsons of former slaves. Robert E. Lee was a vicious traitor who whipped his own slaves. He owned slaves. He spoke for white supremacy
So again,
more than anybody.
Where's the line and who decides?
I
We
think
don't know the answer to either
locally,
one of
we
those
should
questions.
have commissions who,
Oh, for heaven's
of
sakes.
citizens who decide that.
Oh, Mary.
And people
Wait.
also, I think it goes back, people are not moving to the Confederacy. They're moving
No,
to the
Exactly.
South.
Who's
You know,
out
the
who's
South
promoting
is-
the
But when
Confederacy?
they move there, they know what they're moving to. And my point isn't that
They're
my
moving to
point is that
thriving
there's a
metropolis,
reason
to cities.
somebody
Okay.
suddenly picks out a statue of Lee and on the Charlottesville campus, and that reason is not because black people all over America are offended. That isn't the reason. This is Antifa trying to organize chaos and division.
Well, it
And
is.
the
You're
only
right.
guy on the right who agrees with him is Steve Bannon.
Okay, we got to move on.
You guys are in bed with him.
We're out of time. We got to move on.
Oh, whoa, there you go.
We have all heard the term states' rights, now that we've just been talking about, meaning there are some areas where the state has sovereignty and can't be preempted by the federal government. Now we seem to have an issue with city rights. Kansas City, Missouri voters approved a hike in the minimum wage to $10 last month. The increase lasted all of 4 days until a state law passed late in the session took effect and reasserted that the state, not the city, sets minimum wage. The Missouri minimum is back to $7.70 an hour. The Kansas City Star and other activist groups argue that the state has no right to interfere. Woody, are they right?
No. First of all, you know they're wrong because it's in the Star.
Wait.
Look, every year, somebody from the Kansas City government, somebody from the St. Louis City government go down to Jeff City. And they appear in front of a committee because they want money or they want a bill passed that'll help them do something they want to do. And they look at the members of that committee and all these guys from outstate and they say, Kansas City and St. Louis are the economic engines that drive the state of Missouri. Therefore, you must fill in the blank. Well, if we are the economic engine that drives the state of Missouri, then the state of Missouri has a right to take an interest in whether we're damaging the engine. and they think we are, and so they are acting to keep us from doing it. Now, the fact that I was told, and I'm not going to name names here, by a member of the leadership of the legislature, one of the two chambers, that he had received a call a couple of years ago when this first started from an office holder in our city hall saying, look, we're going to pass this thing, but you guys have just got to kill it. Tells you what this is really all about.
Well, there are conflicting reports, too, Annie, about the impact of minimum wage on a community. We sent you the stuff about Seattle. We have one report that says minimum wage increase made things great. Another one said a minimum wage increase made things worse. I
was on a panel about 8 months ago discussing this very topic, and I actually just called Sister Berta down at Operation Breakthrough. And this organization provides child care for those who are working hard, pretty much single moms who are working hard to make it. And Sister Berta had two moms sitting in her office, luckily for me, and I said, so what happens if minimum wage goes up to you, the moms? Well, they both were going to lose services that they're currently getting to keep their households together. One of the gals
because they would make too much money?
Because they would make too much money. So they lose more than they gain with the increase. And so what I always talk about is unintended consequences.
And John, most of the minimum wage battle seems to center on the fast food industry, where we see increasing automation. Right. And won't we see even more automation if there's an increase in the minimum wage?
I don't know about that. I think you'll see increased automation because there's efficiencies in the structure of the business.
This is all tied to union participation as well. And if these workers get a pay raise but then join the union and pay dues, are they really going to make any more money?
I don't know. I would think they probably would. But I think the bigger issue is, democracy is ugly. And a lot of these things are out there. But as Annie said in an earlier conversation, I think having this out there, these votes, the failure of votes, the up and down, thumbs up, thumbs down on minimum wage, is leading to more businesses affecting living wage on their own. And I think that is ultimately a net good thing.
Well, Mary, we saw Crosby Kemper at the library increase the minimum wage there to $10 an hour.
Crosby,
and the Jazz,
left-wing Mr. Crosby.
I thought I was still talking. And Jazz, the restaurant group in Kansas City, voluntarily raising the minimum wage to $10. So do you expect more of that to happen? And should there be a concerted effort to make that happen?
I certainly do. And I have to say, Annie, that I can't imagine Sister Berta being opposed to an increase in the minimum wage overall for everyone. I mean, it's not possible to live a good life as an adult person, maybe even start a family on $19,000 a year. You can't do it. And raising the minimum wage will have some consequences. But most of all, it'll have consequences for those people who work hard every day. Just a moment, let me finish, John. And I think that Catherine Shields was right to introduce her amendment.
To require the city to pay $10.
The city to pay $10. And I'm a former state legislator, and I do agree that it is primarily a state question, just because of the difficulties of doing it.
Cities are the creation of the state is an old expression that is true.
Cities are places that need to make their voices heard, and Kansas City, good for you.
Okay, and now we head to the soapbox. Speaking of letting people's voices be heard, for Roast and Toast, where the Ruckettes have 30 seconds each to appreciate or extirpate people and events in the news, and we start with Woody.
My toast is to the City Council of Seattle, which raised the minimum wage, but at the same time did something shocking in American politics. They commissioned the University of Washington to study the effects of the increases in minimum wage. That's one of the studies that Mike referred to earlier, the one that had access to all the data, and which said that the net effect was an average loss of $125 a month to working poor people in Seattle when you got to the second bump in the minimum wage. That's a study that's going to require a lot of looking from a lot of people all over the country, including Kansas City.
Annie Presley.
Shout out to all those who went and helped in Texas and are gearing up to go to Florida. This is an amazing time in our lives, and those of you who are willing to help out, good on you.
All right, Mary?
Very important stuff going on in our city hall, and also important things going on in Tonganoxie, Kansas. Tyson Chicken coming to town, but they have something in common. Until very recently, too little open dialogue and open process in City Hall. And apparently in Tonganoxie, they want to bring a big Tyson chicken plant, and they didn't think about involving the citizens in the process of deciding if that was a good idea. More openness in City Hall and every City Hall all over our region would be great.
Citizens there are calling foul.
They're calling foul.
John.
I want to give a toast to the citizens of Wyandotte County who 20 years ago voted to unify the Kansas City government and the county government. And over the last 20 years, that has led to unprecedented growth, a unification and cost savings of services, and I think most importantly, 2 consecutive years now of tax reductions.
Amen to that.
Love that.
And finally, here is a mild roast to a local TV news anchor who reported that someone was under investigation for allegations of inappropriate misconduct. There was no further explanation, leading one to wonder what constitutes appropriate misconduct. And that is Ruckus for this time. We'll be back next Thursday at 7. Now for the Ruckettes and the crew, I'm Mike Shannon saying thanks very much for watching and good night.
Production funding for Ruckus has been provided by gifts from Dave and Jamie Cummings, the Hartwig family, Hush Blackwell, Barbara and Peter Gattermeyer, and by viewers like you. Thank you.